Sam woke up that morning a happy 9-year-old boy. He had a spring in his step as he went to play with his friends. The young boys loved to pretend to hunt with their small bows and arrows. They would race around the forest to see who could point out the most animals. Since they were loud little boys, they usually scared off more animals than they could find, but it was still a fun game nonetheless. After a few hours of playing, Sam headed back to his house. It was a simple house made of wood and mud, but it kept him and his family warm and dry. His mother chided him for taking so long in the woods and gave him the task of helping her make winter clothes out of the animal furs that were collected from last week's game. In Sam's opinion, life was good. His community had perfected their way of life since they lived on this land for many years. There was plenty of food, good company, and little conflict. However, Sam's life was changed forever when the white men in uniform showed up at his house that day. But that is the rest of the story. The Indian Removal Act was passed by Congress on May 28, 1830, authorizing President Andrew Jackson to negotiate with Native American tribes in the southern United States for their relocation to the federal territory west of the Mississippi River in exchange for their ancestral homelands. The Cherokee tribe signed the Treaty of New Echota, promising their land to the United States after being told that they would be given money, livestock, various provisions, tools, and other benefits upon relocation to their new territory. Many Native Americans resisted the Indian Removal Act and refused to relocate. The act was not supposed to harm the Native Americans. Andrew Jackson said that the removal of the Native Americans would benefit both parties. He claimed that it would give the Native Americans more freedom from the whites and that it would help to strengthen the southwestern frontier of the United States. All Jackson wanted to do was spread the belief of democracy as far as he could, which meant that the United States needed more land and more power. And now for the rest of the story. The white men tore apart Sam's house, knocking over pottery and other valuables. Sam and his mother were escorted outside the house at gunpoint. His father soon joined them. Sam couldn't comprehend what was happening. He was just having fun with his friends, but now he feared for his life. Others from Sam's community were rounded up as well and were forced to begin walking. Sam lost track of how far they had walked, but finally they stopped. He and his family and friends were forced inside of a stockade, where they stayed for many months, with no shelter, little food, and few possessions. The nights were cold, too cold. Sam grew bored of just sitting around and waiting. He wanted to be free again to roam the forests with his friends. Rumor had it that the white men had taken over their farms. That land wasn't for them to take, but they took it anyway. The conditions in the stockade only grew worse with time. The days grew colder, and at night frost would cover the ground. Having so many people crammed into such a small space led to poor sanitation of the area. Sam's father grew very sick and died about halfway into their time at the stockade. Sam had been watching his people drop dead all around him, but he never would have guessed that his strong father would be one of them. He had no idea how he was supposed to go on living, but he had to for his mother's sake. After many long months, the white men came to round up the community again and lead them out of the stockade. Sam and his family and friends were forced to walk for days over frozen land in the dead of winter. The white men guarded the community closely and always had their guns on hand. Grave after grave was dug into the earth as the community slowly began to freeze and starve to death. Sam kept close to his mother for warmth and protection, as well as he wanted to look after her own health and safety. One day, Sam's mother woke up with a horrible fever and cough, which progressively worsened over the next few days. Sam feared for her life and couldn't bear seeing her health degrade. Watching the light go out in his mother's eyes was the hardest thing that young Sam ever had to experience. He buried her in a shallow grave in the frozen earth. Sam was now alone, cold, hungry, sad, hurt, and angry. He didn't know how to go on living. He didn't know if he wanted to go on living. He missed his old land, the land that held all of his memories, all of his people's legacies, all of his hopes and dreams, all of his good times. His old land was part of his identity. Sam couldn't understand how something that meant so much to him was no longer his, but he had the white men to blame for that. Sam may never forgive those men that did this to him, his family, and his community. They stressed national pride, yet forced his people off the land that they had inhabited for centuries. They preached about democracy and freedom, yet enslaved his people during the journey to this new land. They spoke of a safe and nonviolent removal, yet came in with their fancy weapons and killed many of his people. They promised money, rations, and supplies to make the relocation easier, yet left his people with very little to start over with. They expected Sam's people to adapt to their more civilized way of life one day and to begin worshiping their God. These were the same people who had once fled their home country for religious freedoms, who had fought hard for their own freedom, and who had founded their nation on independence. Samuel Cloud, a Cherokee boy who experienced firsthand the Indian Removal Act, hated the United States for practically imperializing his people. He hated that his life would never be the same. He hated that he lost his father in the stockade and his mother on the dreadful Trail of Tears, along with so many other loved ones. He hated that his children would never know what life was like on their old land in the Southeast. He hated that one day his people would probably be under the control of white men and would have to start living like them. He hated that the Cherokees had no say in the removal, and he hated that many Americans were not aware of what really happened to his people. And now you know the rest of the story.